On your mobile, on your wavelength, Talk Radio and Talk TV.
This is The Late Show with Andre Walker and Asher Gould. And look, we said we'd talk about the autumn statement. I have to say, it hasn't filled me with any great joy or excitement because of the enormous tax rises that have taken place. There have been a few tax cuts. But anyway, Phillip Ullmann is a social entrepreneur, an enormously successful businessman with the Cordant Group, which it was effectively a temp agency that had 100,000 employees at one point. But now you're relatively disillusioned with what's taking place. Tell me what's wrong with the autumn statements by Jeremy Hunt this week.
For me, we're merely rearranging the deck chairs in the Titanic. We're not really dealing with the real problem, which is how do we recreate a new narrative for the political economy, a new storyline. It's same old. We set targets, we slightly beat the targets. Then we say we've got money to spend on all kinds of things, and we try to win an election. And no one's actually looking at fundamental principles, things like what is money, what is credit, these basic questions that no one's asking.
Well, in that case, what is money and what is credit?
Okay, so again, being a Jew, I start by looking at the Bible. And money in the Bible is, I put it in a bank, and it's mine. It's actually mine. The bank is like a safety deposit box. It's actually my money, and the bank can't do whatever it likes with it. But what we've created in the world is a confusion about that. When I put money in the bank, in fact, it's not my money. The money is actually, I lend it to the bank, and the bank can do whatever it likes with it. And in many cases, lends 7 or 8 times what I put in the bank. So the whole concept,
which devalues your money. When they do quantitative easing, it's basically a reverse tax, isn't it? So your money becomes worth less.
It's fractional reserve banking, it's called.
Yeah, that's what I want.
So just to be clear, and I'm sorry for being the stupid one in the studio here, but I understand that what happens when I go to a bank is I put £100 in and they loan it out to people who need mortgages. Where have I gone wrong in that analysis of things, Philip?
That's not what happens. The banks, in fact, don't need any deposits. They can lend. They simply push a button and they create a loan. They don't need any deposit. They don't need any reserves in the central bank.
So is that effectively quantitative easing by a bank?
Yes, quantitative easing is by the government, but the banks, which
create it themselves,
they literally do whatever they like. These are private. It's a crazy concept, but they can do whatever they like.
Yeah. Too powerful to fail as well.
Absolutely right.
So is all this money effectively what's causing inflation? Because to me, if one day you have £100 and the next day you have £110 in the economy, that's 10% inflation, isn't it?
Absolutely. The point is this, that the banks are private organisations. They can do whatever they like. You give them the power to literally create money, literally press the button, and what they do with it, they lend maybe 45% of it for assets, for real estate, whether it's commercial or residential, which means you inflate the prices of houses and you inflate the prices of commercial property. Whilst it's good for if you've got it, if you haven't got it, it's inflation because you can't buy a house. And we have a problem now that young people are not able to get on the property ladder because there's so much money being pumped in to inflating the house
So
prices.
basically your £100 that's now £110 was in an economy of, say, $1 billion, and if it's in an economy of $2 billion, you might have gained 10%, but it's worth 90% less.
So let's go through to what they're lending on, because I get the 7 or 8 times, I get the fractional banking thing, right? Okay, it's relatively new to me, but we've got 45% in commercial and domestic, real estate, right?
Yes, and that's inflationary for assets.
Okay.
30 to 35% is in stocks and shares. What that means is that pumps up the price of stocks and shares, which means that people who haven't got stocks and shares can't buy stocks and shares. Yeah. It's again inflation.
It's inflation, and then they put the interest rates up, which puts credit costs up, which causes inflation in itself when they're trying to reduce it.
The whole concept of the cost of living increase is inhumane because people can't put food on the table. How do we deal with it? We then have this myth that you've got to increase interest rates to deal with inflation.
Which makes it worse.
Which makes it worse because the people are not only losing in the cost of living, they're actually losing because they're
and costs have to go up, business have to put the costs up because money's become more expensive.
Absolutely right. So we're just in a spiral.
So we're on 45% on property, 30% on stocks and shares.
And then maybe 15-20% on consumption, things like cars, radios, TVs, which again is inflationary, and only 10 to 15% of all that money that's created by the banks actually goes to meaningful employment, real jobs. But
eventually it blows up and goes bang, doesn't it, at some point again? So when's it going to go bang?
Good question. To call that precise date is impossible, but what I can say to you is the amount of debt in the economy is crazy. Thinking about the derivatives alone, I mean, those are quadrillions in the world of derivatives, which means you've got crazy amounts of debt. Since Nixon broke the link with the gold standard in 71, money literally can be created ad nauseum.
Our debt's apparently 110 billion a year. The interest on it.
Yeah, it's absolutely
110 billion a year.
And eventually people will realise their debts aren't going to get repaid.
So what happens when it all goes bang? Is there like Mad Max in the streets? What goes on, man?
When it goes bang, last time in 2008, they did a deal and it was more of the same. Hopefully this time round, when it goes bang, is we go back to the drawing board. And I don't think people would accept the bailout of the banks again.
I'm going to go to Roger. Roger, you're looking a little unimpressed, but I have to say...
He looks furious.
I'm not an economist, I wouldn't pretend to be, but when I listen to what Philip's got to say, there's got to be concerns about the fact that debt is out of control. There's got to be concerns about the fact that inflation's out of control. And what Philip's saying to me, it sounds to me to be a relatively sensible analysis of what the problem is.
Yes, I think it is, but I think it's a very macro level thing. It isn't really what I would identify as what's responsible for the mess we're in now. Inflation being where it is a different topic, which we can cover later. It's a separate issue, not really related so much to what Philip's saying. But what we're actually talking about is the autumn statement. And I think that what I would say about that is not to take away from what Philip has said about underlying fundamentals. I don't think they're the cause, however. I think that given the 13-year history of bad judgment calls, scandals, and the rest, I think Jeremy Hunt's decision yesterday to go in the direction that he did, and Rishi's, is probably the proverbial straw, the proverbial nail in the coffin for the Tory party, because he made an egregious and outrageous choice. Now, what he should have done was to unfreeze some of the tax thresholds so that the lowest earners don't get dragged, as they call it, fiscal drag, into the tax net.
Apparently 3 or 4 million have been dragged in.
4 million have been dragged into the tax net who probably shouldn't be there. And 3 million people who are in the tax net have been dragged into paying higher taxes. Yeah. Now, what they've done by not touching those thresholds, and let me just say parenthetically that all the rest, the alcohol and the national insurance and the blah, 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 doesn't even make a dent to compare with the tax burden that was created by not taking this action yesterday.
Which was the worst for 7 years anyway.
It's the worst tax burden since 1948. They have created what will soon be a £50 billion war chest. And I have been saying for over a year that they are going to do that, to give it away, to try to save themselves and win the next general election.
Roger, just to explain that very quickly, I do. So when you say 50 billion war chest, they've literally put that money to one side.
That money will accumulate to one side.
And they bribe business before the election, basically.
Bingo. In other words, what they have done is rather than take their foot off our throat and alleviate the cost of living, they have bought business with a huge package of stimuli and incentives so that business, thoroughly disgusted with the performance of the party so far, doesn't defect to labor, and in a way that labor won't be able to match.
Is this very big business?
You're therefore saying, Philip.
And what I'm saying is what they've done is cynical, narcissistic. I've said this on 5 programs yesterday and today. It's just unbelievable, and I am getting posts and mail and phone calls saying, it goes so far as to say nobody, Dr. Roger, can be this stupid or this ignorant. There is a plot afoot.
Well, they've ruined loads of businesses.
I'm getting
since COVID.
Conspiracy theorists coming to me saying, you've got to smell the coffee, Roger.
Aren't they just working for the big blue chip company? They're basically trying to drive out all
They made a choice. They made a choice. Do we give this money, which will most of all benefit the red wall voters and the other people who probably won't vote for us this time, or do we give it to keep big business on side? And the conspiracy theorists are taking that and saying they're actually in bed with the World Economic Forum in Davos and Larry Fink of BlackRock, and it's all
Is 50 billion a lot though? I mean, they spent 35 billion on the track and trace.
It's enough. It's enough to tempt big business, and it's only the start, because that's what builds up over the next few years.
Philip, you've been a big businessman. You're now an investor. I mean, you know, this revolving door between government and big business, the idea that the system is not serving people, I'm incredibly worried about it. I mean, it just feels to me like there's a whole system of money that nobody understands. There's a whole system of economics that nobody understands. And this complaint that we had about the European Union, which was that deals were being done between the EU and big business behind the back of the British public, that thing, if Roger's right, is just basically transferred to Westminster.
Well, what's even more frightening is that you're not hearing Labour, even Rachel Reeves, with her newest book, which is going to soon be retitled Citation Needed. Even Rachel Reeves and the others are not criticizing this and saying they would do something different. That's what's really scary.
Well, they're all in on it, aren't they? It's a one-party system.
They're going to do the same thing. They're going to come in and raise taxes even more. So we're in a real tough place.
So, Philip, we're all agreed?
No, I'm not agreed. No, what I'm saying is the fundamental problem is at a macro level. Yeah, we have a debtor-based system, lending, which is fundamentally for the wealthy, for those that have assets. So if we look at the problem that we fundamentally have, that when we lend, the whole system protects the creditor, the people with assets, effectively, and that means that we charge interest and the borrower has to pay interest to the lender. We also have system which allows the assets of the borrower to be taken.
But Philip, can I not pull you up there and say, is there not an argument? Is there not an argument? You're saying fundamentally the system is flawed. Is there not an argument for saying we could make the system a bit better?
No, to me. But what we have to do is look at fundamentals. Yeah, we either rearrange the deck chairs in the Titanic and continue to tweak, or we think from basics what is actually wrong with the system, and we have to change the system, and we're not doing that.
I'd use a different example than the Titanic and deck chairs. I mean, you're talking about fine-tuning an engine. We're talking about people who won't even change the oil. Okay? Yes. If they won't even change the oil on the ruddy car, to talk to them about the kind of high-level stuff you're talking about, first of all, would they even understand it? Jeremy Hunt has never worked 24 hours a day.
Yeah, well, he wanted the corporation tax 16%, then he gets in and puts it, 30%.
He wanted it 12%. Make me prime minister, it'll be 12. 3 weeks later, it should be 25.
But they're all in on it, basically,
malice,
aren't they? They're making money, they're filling their boots.
Malice in Blunderland is what I say.
It's not, they're filling their boots, it's not blunder, they're actually doing it for themselves.
But the practicality.
But what Philip is saying is high-level economics, and there's good arguments for it. But you've got a mechanic who won't even change your oil, let alone start retuning the engine.
We're fundamentally saying there's a problem with the system, which means that the politicians are not experienced business people, and therefore they haven't got the experience to actually challenge the business. So
but they're looking to fill their boots as well. The big businesses go, come and work for us after. They're all in on it.
But fundamentally, I mean,
whatever
you think about Roger and Philip and what they've told us today, you have to accept that what you are talking about in terms of changing our economy and protecting our economy is far beyond anything. I used to work at the House of Commons. Nobody sits there and says, I'm concerned that the system of
fractional reserve
banking is pushing up property prices.
Fractional what?
I agree with you, but that's why we need experienced business people to start working with the state.
They're not going to get into politics.
But we're in deep shite. What's the solution today?
The solution is, when there's a systemic collapse, we sit around the table and we actually go back to basics.
So it's got to collapse first, really.
So yes, because we're not going to get the kind of changes we're talking about unless it collapses.
And in terms of when the collapse will come, so you believe that it's inevitable there will be a collapse. There was a collapse in 2008.
But then the rich make even more.
Hang on. Nobody did anything. When will the collapse come?
I can't call it because that's almost impossible to do. But it looks to me as if it's imminent. I'm not going to give you a precise time, but fundamentally, any regime comes to an end, and we're talking about ends of regime here, geopolitical. We're at the stage where the Western system of capitalism is reaching the end of its useful life cycle, and something else needs to replace it.
But Ash just said it. I mean, 10 years ago we had the credit crunch financial crisis, the worst thing any of us have seen, and look what happened. Nothing.
They made more money. The people at course
they made more money,
much richer.
So I hear what you're saying, but I think, forgive me, but I think you're being terribly biblical and theoretical, if I'm
I hear that, but I'm actually a pragmatist. Yeah,
okay,
I live in the real world.
I'm sure you
I live in the real world, and fortunately, I've been able.
Well, I think
what I'm saying.
I think the
is
problem
that we need to get the right kind of people to work with the leaders to start to give them a different vision.
That sounds like truth, beauty, and justice is great. On a practical level, I think the only solution is PR, is proportional representation.
But if
some party other than these two can get some new kinds of people, as you're describing, Philip, and get in there.
But Roger, I mean, we are out of time. But Roger, if you're going to talk about practical solutions, the one thing that I genuinely think we shouldn't allow is after 2008, when nothing changed and nothing happened, some of the leverage on. Some of the leverage is now worse than it was.
No, it's not. No. I was partners with a giant bank in 2008, and I worked with those guys inside. I mean, it was total madness. Okay, parties, drugs.
Well, what's happened
booze,
to those guys since? Some of them
they've retired to the country.
By the way, I'll give you some good news. The producers have said that this is so good they want to continue for a couple more minutes. So, Philip, please
let me just say to you that the concept of PR, I don't think will solve anything. Fundamentally, what we need to do is get democracy working, which means we have to. One minute. Listen, I'm going to explain. I'm going to give you a chance. I'll explain it to you. So, what we're going to do is make things simple. The trouble is, all the measures that we use, GDP, economic growth, the layman hasn't got a clue. Which means when you're voting in an election, you don't really understand what you're voting about.
That's why they do it. They don't want to.
They don't. But what we're saying is,
Philip, we understand the problem. Show me the solution.
The solution is that we simplify matters. We start to talk about in simple terms.
What does that look like?
It's a different means of communication.
But we simplified it with Brexit, the referendum, and we said, let's have it. And then they went, no, you're not having it.
I told you.
Oh, hang on.
No, you can't have it.
This is a radio show, not a wrestling match.
Sir Lindsay Hoyle just said, Phillip Ullmann, please stand up.
Now, can I tell you one thing? Can I tell you one thing? People have asked. I've often wondered what it must be like sitting round at a Jewish dinner at Shabbat. I now know what it's like.
You don't know.
Right, so calm down, everyone. Philip, continue.
No, the answer is simple. And for democracy to work, we must accept that people need to understand what they're voting for. It's so ridiculously complex that no one understands, and it's a lottery.
And there's no difference either.
There's no difference between the two parties. They're trying to win an election rather than to sort out.
We need to reform the system like they did in the 1830s.
No, and the younger people have been left behind.
It's rotten, isn't it? The whole system's rotten.
The system is rotten. It needs to be revisited. We need to look at.
But they won't let it happen. The politicians are on a good thing. Why would they let it happen?
Because the young people have been left behind, and the answer is democracy will work, and they'll start to say, well, no,
they won't let it work.
But they will, because ultimately they can't buy houses, they can't get meaningful jobs. Of course they'll work.
Well, you keep enunciating, you keep describing the problem, and we're all agreeing with you. What I don't hear is, what is the solution? What are the headlines going to say has changed next week?
But hang on a second.
You're basically saying when the crap hits the fan.
Hang on a second. I actually buy this, and I'll tell you why I buy it. Because if you agree there will be another systemic problem like 2008 because it's inevitable, point number one, then what you do is you say, look, fractional reserve banking has to go. The idea that all this speculation in property, we need to curtail it, because the reality is all of these parents own the houses their kids can't afford to buy. That is obviously a ludicrous situation. And the idea that economic modelling itself needs to be simplified to an extent that people could vote in an election, that to me sounds sensible. I mean, it might be nonsense because I'm not an economist.
Now, what I'm saying is we have to go back to basics that people can understand, and we can say, what is money? People don't get it. They think they put their money in a bank account and it's there for them. It isn't, and we have to get real with the people. They think that credit is there and it's there for the
Roger, you think Philip's a bit of a dreamer, but is he wrong in what he's saying?
No, he's not wrong in much of what he's saying, but it's talking about the problem without a solution.
Oh, there is a solution.
Your solution is the system breaks.
Why?
No, I've got. It will take time to explain. I'm not going to stand on one leg.
Is this radio interrupters? Come on, tell us already.
Well, let me tell you something. I regret that we only scheduled this for 20 minutes.
Yeah.
But what there will be round 2, and Philip will come no doubt and give us some more solutions.
Good.
But I have to say, the problems that have identified today, I'm genuinely extremely concerned about, and I think so will most of our listeners. Roger Gewald is staying with us. Phillip Ullmann, we're going to say goodbye. Thank you so much. We'll be back in a minute.
Goodbye. Thank you.
On the app, on your mobile, Talk Radio and Talk TV.
Picture this. You're out Christmas shopping at Dobby's. Then all of a sudden, you do a double take.